Let's record this para sa mga natulog na. Okay, last time we ended with the antibiotics. So do not forget how our anti-cancer drugs can also be classified as antibiotics if they are obtained from other types of cells or microorganisms. So we discussed last time our anthracyclines, our bleomycin, and that's the last one. I think it's the bleomycin. So most of our antibiotics are not really cell cycle specific, but let's go back to the cell cycle specific natin na drugs. We have here the alkylating agents. So for the alkylating agents, from the name itself, they exert their cell killing action by binding to the most of the time to the DNA of the cancer cells. So if the alkyl group, so in your organic chemistry, you have encountered there the different functional groups, including the alkyl groups, wherein ano ito, hydrocarbon, pag nag-bind ito sa DNA, it will disrupt the DNA replication and thus causing mutation to the DNA of the cancer cells. Now, what is our problem with alkylating agents? Aside from killing the cancer cells, since they can be mutagenic, they are also considered carcinogenic. So these are the anti-cancer drugs that should be properly kept and stored, because if we will be exposed, we can have mutations, we can experience mutations to our own DNA. Now, what are these alkylating agents? We have the mustard derivatives. We have here the cyclophosphamide and the ifosfamide. So we have, again, two under the mustard derivatives. Remember, they are all under the alkylating agents. Now, what is the mechanism of action of the mustard derivatives? Actually, we have a part in their structure that will be connected or will be incorporated into the DNA. So once cyclophosphamide or ifosfamide is given to the patient, it will be metabolized by the liver, and it will be broken down into a specific active compound. Actually, we have the phosphoramide and the mustard. I mean phosphoramide, mustard, and the acrolein, in which yung pinakakailangan talaga natin for its anti-cancer action is the phosphoramide mustard. So yun yung ma-incorporate doon sa DNA, and once incorporated, it will cause mutation and it will be toxic to the cell, thus killing the cancer cells. So the other one, the other active compound that is a product of degradation is the acrolein, which is naman responsible for the toxicity of the mustard derivatives. So when I'm talking about toxicity, which is caused by the acrolein, I'm talking about the hemorrhagic cystitis, which is like inflammation of the bladder. So magkakaroon ng problem that will lead to the fibrosis of the bladder. So do not forget, because this one is a board exam question. Again, we are in the alkylating agents, specifically in the mustard derivatives, and then inside the body they will be broken down into phosphoramide mustard, which is the one responsible for the cytotoxic activity for the cancer cells. But we have another one here that will be produced during the metabolism. We have the acrolein, and now this will be responsible to the toxicity of the mustard derivatives, specifically toxicity in the bladder. So what is our antidote? This is another board exam question. Since the patient will experience inflammation in the bladder, our antidote can be hydration and an intravenous injection of the mesna. Nakabold yan siya because again, board exam question yan siya. So we have here the meaning of mesna, sodium 2 mercaptoethane sulfonate. Again, sodium 2 mercaptoethane sulfonate. That's the meaning of mesna, which is our antidote for the toxicity of our mustard derivatives. Now, one problem of our alkylating agents, especially the mustard derivatives, is the resistance. So it is like the microorganism when we don't really follow the correct dosage regimen, the bacteria or the other types of microorganisms can mutate and can be resistant. So that is why we have the antimicrobial resistant drive nowadays. Pero sa cancer naman, if we use the mustard derivatives, prone din ito sa resistance. So these are the reasons why the cancer cells will be resistant to the mustard derivatives. Number one, increased capability to repair DNA lesions. Remember, the compound, the metabolite of the mustard derivatives will just be incorporated to the DNA, disrupting the replication, disrupting the sequence of the nitrogenous bases in the DNA. However, remember, our own DNA can actually do repair. Again, pwede niyang i-repair ang sarili niya. So that one is there, that will now become a reason of the resistance of the cancer cells to the alkylating agents. And then decreased transport of the alkylating drug into the cell. This is also possible if the alkylating drugs will not be transferred. If ever it is given intravenously, it cannot pass through the tissues, it cannot go to the cell, then it cannot enter and it cannot be incorporated to the DNA. So, source pa rin siya ng resistance. And then, increased production of glutathione and GSH-associated proteins needed to conjugate the alkylating agents. And increased glutathione S-transferase activity. Let's just combine the two kasi they are almost similar. Now, remember, our liver is also capable of producing glutathione, which are free radical scavengers, and that alkylating agents in the body can be considered as free radicals. So once they'll have an they'll have what do you call that, interaction with the glutathione, pwede siyang malinis ni glutathione. So therefore, mag-cause siya ng resistance. So that is, these are the reasons of the resistance to our alkylating agents. Now, cyclophosphamide is the most commonly used alkylating agents among all the alkylating agents that we have, not just for the mustard derivatives. We give this either orally or intravenously. While ifosfamide is only given intravenously and it has an additional side effect, which is neurotoxicity due to the formation of another metabolite called chloroacetaldehyde. Nagahina ang audio. Am I not audible? Audible ba?
Audible, ma'am, pero mahina po.
Or hindi? Tell me if I'm not audible, because we will go back to the previous slide. Okay, that's the difference between the cyclophosphamide and the ifosfamide. Now, another group of alkylating agents is called the nitrosoureas. We have two here. Let's differentiate them based on their route of administration, just like the cyclophosphamide and the ifosfamide. Carmostine is given intravenously while lumostine is given orally. Now, what is special about these alkylating agents is that they can actually they can penetrate the central nervous system, so they can penetrate even the blood-brain barrier, and thus they are utilized for the treatment of brain tumors. Kasi most of the anti-cancer drugs that we have discussed, most of them are given for lymphomas or leukemias. Yan yung medyo marami so far, but this one is unique due to their lipophilic property that they can cross the blood-brain barrier. They are given to the treatment, or they are given for brain tumors. Now, how these drugs exert their action. They exert their cytotoxic effects by also alkylating the DNA or even the RNA. Thus, mag-i-inhibit sila ng replication. And ano na yan siya? Series of steps na when you inhibit DNA replication, you will also inhibit RNA and protein synthesis. So alkylation pa rin. Merong part of the structure of our nitrosoureas that will be incorporated to the DNA sequence, disrupting the sequence, and thus all the other things, replication, transcription, and translation, will also be inhibited. Okay? And then we have the carbazine, which is also metabolized in the body. It will be converted to methyl imidazole carboxamide or MTIC. And then this metabolite will also be incorporated to the DNA at the O6 position of guanine. But nevertheless, ganun lang. Most of the alkylating agents inside the body, especially in the liver, metabolize, and then their metabolites will be now incorporated to the DNA. Paulit-ulit lang yan na mechanism of action for our alkylating agents. Now, this time, the carbazine is given for melanoma, that is cancer sa skin, and Hodgkin lymphoma. And then we have temozolomide. These drugs are not really common. We seldom see them. Even if you work or even if you will have your internship in the hospital pharmacy, we will not really encounter them, especially that they are being stored properly for us not to be exposed sa kanila. Now, yung pangalan pa nila hindi din masyadong madali i-memorize, but nevertheless, we really need to study them. So, temozolomide is similar to our dacarbazine, but just like our nitrosoureas, this can also cause or cross the blood-brain barrier. Thus, this is used also for cancers or tumors in the brain like the glioblastomas. Glioblastoma is a very aggressive metastatic cancer in the brain. And then we also have Anaplastic Astrocytomas. This is still in the brain, but what is unique here is the presence of the star-like cancer cells, meaning the shape of the cancer cells is just like the stars. That is why it is called astrocytomas. But nevertheless, both of them, glioblastomas and astrocytomas, are cancers in the brain. Okay? And then we also have metastatic melanoma. So this is in the skin. So this is the unique thing about temozolomide. It's similar to the carbazine, but it can cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, other alkylating agents, we have the meclorethamine, which is used for lymphatic cancers or lymphoma, melphalan for multiple myeloma, and chlorambucil is given for chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Now, by the way, melphalan and chlorambucil can cause moderate hematologic toxicities and gastrointestinal tract upset. So, both of them can cause anemia or other problem with the blood, and also they are notorious of causing problems in the gastrointestinal tract. Now, another thing here is the busulfan, which is used for chronic granulocytic leukemia and is a board exam question. Why? Because this anti-cancer drug is also notorious of causing problem in the lungs. Actually, it can cause pulmonary fibrosis. That's a problem with the tissues in the lungs, and and the physicians call this a busulfan lung. For example, during the diagnosis, like magpa-X-ray, the doctors will see a lot of scars in the tissues of the person sa lungs. So, ginatawag siya busulfan lang. So, be mindful in studying anti-cancer drugs, what you really need to know is anong group sila ng cancer drugs na belong, anti-metabolite ba sila, antibiotics, or alkylating agents ba sila, and their mechanism of action. Most of the time, if you know saan sila na belong, na group, na anti-cancer, you will also have a hint what their mechanism of action is. But aside from that, you also have to take note of the toxicities, especially those na I really highlighted, like this one, busulfan, can cause problems in the lungs. While last time I have discussed the antibiotics, especially the daunorubicin, can cause cardiotoxicity problems, and the cyclophosphamide is notorious of causing problems in the bladder. Okay. Next, we have any questions first? That is the last part for the alkylating agents. Would like to clarify something? Okay. So let us continue. Let's have the microtubule inhibitors. This will be the fourth group of drugs for our cancer. And from the name itself, microtubule inhibitor, their action is on the mitotic spindle. So that is the reason why before I started discussing the anti-cancer drugs, I let you review the mitosis, kasi mitotic spindle is found there, especially in the metaphase. So what is mitotic spindle? It is actually a protein. It is made up of protein, but it's on the cell. It's an intracellular skeleton or a cytoskeleton. It can be found inside the cell. And this one is important for the structure of the cytoplasm and all the other eukaryotic cells. So what is in the mitotic spindle? It consists of chromatin plus a system of microtubules composed of the protein tubulin. So tubulin ang tawag sa protein na nasa mitotic spindle. Now, what is the function of this cytoskeleton? This is very important in the division of the DNA into two daughter cells that are formed when it undergoes mitosis, especially during the metaphase and the anaphase. So in the mitosis, remember, in the metaphase especially, there will be lining of the chromosomes at the center of the cell. That's for the metaphase. So ito yung metaphase plate here. However, in the anaphase, these chromosomes will be divided. One will go here, and the other one will go on the right side. Diba yan yung nangyayari sa anaphase. So the one responsible class of pulling one part of the chromosome to the other side, and then the other side will go, the other part will also go on the other side, is the mitotic spindle. So siya yung maghihila ng nahati na chromosome. Yan yung importance, again, in mitotic spindle. So it's a protein made up of tubulin. It's a cytoskeleton, but it's more on the cell division. So without the mitotic spindle, metaphase cannot really move on to anaphase, kasi walang hihila sa na-divide na chromosomes to each side of the cell. So yun yung trabaho ni mitotic spindle, and the drugs under this will really inhibit the microtubule or the mitotic spindle, thus inhibiting cell division. So it's also good for cancer, because remember, our problem with cancer is they rapidly divide. So let's inhibit the division. So what are those drugs under the microtubule inhibitors? We have the Vinca Alkaloids. We have 3 here. the vincristine, vinblastine, and the vinorelbine. They are alkaloids, meaning they are derived from the plant. And what is this plant? The periwinkle. So scientific name, it's the old scientific name is actually the Vinca rosea. That's the old scientific name. But I don't know if you have learned this one in your pharmacognosy. The new scientific name of the periwinkle is the Catharanthus roseus. Let me write it on the screen. Text na lang. Again, the new scientific name, Catharanthus roseus. That's the new scientific name for our periwinkle. So in one plant, we can get alkaloids, and it led to the discovery of 3 anti-cancer drugs: vincristine, vinblastine, and vinorelbine. So they are generally administered in combination with other drugs, just like the other anti-cancer drugs. We don't really do monopharmacy here for cancer. Most of the time, polypharmacy talaga ito to avoid resistance. So this one is the picture of the periwinkle. Are you familiar with this plant? Are you familiar? You can actually see this anywhere. And it is not just color violet. Marami ito. May color yellow, may color white. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, ito yung ginagamit sa He Loves Me or He Loves Me Not na flower. Kasi it can be seen anywhere. And yung hiwalay kasi ang kanyang petals. So, this is widely distributed in the Philippines. So, very common. It's where may mga anti-cancer drugs tayo na nakuha from this. So, what is the mechanism of action now? Since microtubule inhibitors sila, they are cell cycle specific since the microtubule is important in the M phase or in the metaphase. So if we inhibit that, the formation of the mitotic spindle, we also inhibit metaphase and thus mitosis. So that's cell division. So what will happen to the Vinca alkaloids? They will bind to the protein in the microtubule or the tubulin, and that will block now the ability of the protein to polymerize or to form the microtubules that will be important in the division of the chromosomes. That's the mechanism of action of the Vinca alkaloids. Okay? So what are the adverse effects of our Vinca alkaloids? We have the phlebitis. That's the problem in the injection site. And then the cellulitis. And then commonly we have the nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. And common also for the anti-cancer drugs, all the other anti-cancer drugs, alopecia. So again, our problem with the Vinca alkaloids is the problem talaga in the injection site. So we have phlebitis, inflammation ng blood vessel, and the cellulitis also, mostly in the injection site also. So the vincristine, the brand name for this is Oncovin. Where do we use the vincristine? We have here for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, especially in children, and other types of tumors na mga sarcoma sila. So it will be on the connective tissues. We have the Wilms tumor, the Ewing soft tissue sarcoma, Hodgkin and non-Hodgkin lymphomas, and other rapidly proliferating neoplasms. But aside from the mentioned toxicities, we have here additional side effects like peripheral neuropathy or paresthesias. Parang may tingling sensation in the periphery. Pero bito, ginatusok-tusok yung mga kamot. Paresthesias, and there is loss of reflexes, foot drop, and ataxia. There will be loss in muscle coordination and also constipation. And then vinblastine is used in combination with bleomycin and another drug, Cisplatin, where we are going to discuss a little while, for metastatic testicular carcinoma. So cancer in the testes, systemic Hodgkin and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But our problem with vinblastine is it is a potent myelosuppressant, meaning it will suppress the activity of the bone marrow, leading to problems with the blood cell counts. So it can lead to anemia, it can lead to the decrease in the number of the white blood cells. That might be the reason why the patient will be at risk for infection. Okay, and then binaural bean, the advantage of this over the two Vinca Alkaloids is that this is less neurotoxic agent. So it doesn't have the neurotoxicities like the paresthesias or the neuropathy. Wala siya niyan. But this one is used for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. Okay? So number 2, pinakauna yung Vinca Alkaloids for our Mitotic Spindle or Microtubule Inhibitor. The second one are the taxanes and other related drugs. We have two types of drugs under this. We have the Paclitaxel and the docetaxel. So you can easily identify them by their names and with taxel. Now, they are also cell cycle specific, especially in the second growth phase and also the metaphase. But they are not really the same with the Vinca alkaloids, wherein they will really inhibit the tubulin in the microtubule. This time, the taxanes actually promotes polymerization and stabilization of the polymer of the microtubules. They don't really destroy the microtubules. Instead, they will stabilize the microtubules. But when you stabilize the microtubules, it will lead to the formation of a lot of microtubules. So mag-accumulate sila inside the cell. And that will also lead to the disruption in the mitosis na process. So ganun pa rin, even though the microtubules are being stabilized, madidisrupt pa rin si cell division because of the accumulation of the tubulin or the microtubules. So the adverse effects of our taxanes, we have here neutropenia. Penia means decrease, so there will be decrease in the number of the neutrophils, and the leukopenia, not just the neutrophils but the other types of white blood cells. These two or these three here are common to other anti-cancer drugs. So si Paclitaxel, this is the first member of the taxanes. This is the first member of the taxane family that is used for cancer chemotherapy. So the Paclitaxel is actually an alkaloid, just like the Vinca alkaloids. The Paclitaxel is also an alkaloid derived from plants. So it can be derived from the Pacific yew tree. The scientific name is Taxus brevifolia, or it can even be obtained in the European yew tree or the Taxus baccata. Now, where do we use the Paclitaxel? This is used for advanced ovarian cancer or even for metastatic breast cancer. So, yan yung gamit ni Paclitaxel. So, this one is an alkaloid. If I'm not mistaken, Paclitaxel was included in the board exam during the time nila Ma'am Cherry. So, lumabas ito sa board exam nila, pero it was in the area 1. Sa area 1 pa lang ng board exam, lumabas na si anti-cancer drug, which is Paclitaxel, but it's on the structure. So, ang tanong sa question, sabi, hindi ko siya makalimtan kaya mo na unang ipangutanan ni Cherry's po na siya. Ma'am, gawas ang Paclitaxel sa muang boards. Sa area 1 pa lang. Kung sa question, ano siya, asa daw dito ang chemical structure ni Paclitaxel. Yan ako, pangutanan ako siya. Yan, mo answer. Ano siya, if I'm not mistaken, ang letter B daw ang letter C, kabalo siya sa answer. Kabalo siya kung unsa to. Kay ang isa daw morphine, ang isa codeine. So, i-eliminate na to niya sa iyahang choices. So, ang iyang gipilian na lang, letter A daw, letter D. Niya, according to her, ang letter A daw is a simple chemical structure, while the letter D is a very complicated chemical structure. So I told her, syempre itong complicated, Cherry. Paclitaxel, it's an alkaloid, so it's a big molecule. So definitely it will be a complicated one, a big one. So ano siya, ay, ang iyang gipili daw kay letter A. So dili ko kalimot nga, nikiingon na sa kuha ni Cherry after taking the first day of the exam. So, though wala na ko na siya gi-include dire sa ako ang slide, pero it's your responsibility now to look for the structures of these drugs. Kasi we'll never know anong drug ang itatanong for a chemical structure. So please start familiarizing. Maayo si Cherry kay kabalo siya kung sa structure ni codeine and ni morphine. Most of these structures will not really be included in the area 4, the area in pharmacology, but this will be included sa area 1, sa chemistry. Dito na siya mugawas ang mga structures na. Okay? My generic brand name? Yeah, there are also generic brands in the board exam. Pero syempre, we cannot really pinpoint as a dapit dito. Pero most of the time, it will be either the generic and the innovator drug, that's the first brand in the market, or generic and the most common brand, the most sikat na brand. Pwede siya yung ana. So, depende siya sa naging sa question. So, it's better for you to be familiar with both the innovator drug and the most common drug in the market. Actually, you can identify the most common drug in the market if you underwent the internship in the community. But unfortunately, kasi hindi kayo nag-community internship. Kasi honestly, I don't have the idea also ano na yung common brands na ginagamit in the community nowadays. Because I don't work in the community. Siguro if you know someone working in the community, you may ask them sa mga common drugs, mostly mga anti-hypertensive, anti-diabetic, drugs for cholesterol, and what else? Mostly kanang mga common. Mga common na po na sakit diri sa Philippines. So, medyo daghan-daghan pa mo isulod sa inyong brain cells. Okay? Actually, I don't really include brands in my slides. Though I have other slides na merong brand, pero most of the time, I don't include them. Except for innovator drugs, though. Kasi nagbabago yan kada year kung ano yung common. And at the same time, mas ma-familiar dyan na siya ninyo sa community pharmacy. Kana lang atong problema kasi it's unexpected para mo na community internship. Okay, next, the second drug under the taxanes, we have here the docetaxel, which is semi-synthetic. Unlike the paclitaxel, it's really an herbal drug derived from a plant, so natural siya, alkaloid siya. Ito semi-synthetic. It's still derived from the European yew tree or the Taxus baccata, but this one is being synthesized in the lab. The structure is derived from the paclitaxel, tapos there is modification, so semi-synthetic na lang siya. But just like the Paclitaxel, this is also used for breast cancer, pero this is just a second-line therapy. So it's not really the first choice of anti-cancer for advanced breast cancer, but it can also be used for prostate, for gastrointestinal, and non-small cell lung cancer. Okay? And then thirdly, we have here the Hexadepalone, which is not really a taxane, but it is also a microtubule inhibitor. So this one is a novel drug. It's a new drug. its structure is really new. It's not derived from naturally occurring alkaloids, but bago iyang structure tanan. But its mechanism of action is similar to the taxane, where it can inhibit the microtubules, especially in the metaphase, in the mitosis. And just like the other taxanes, this can also be used for metastatic breast cancer, but in combination with alkylating agents or other drugs like oral antimetabolites, the oral fluoropyrimidine, which is capecitabine, or pwede din siya monotherapy. So this is one anti-cancer drug that can stand alone. Okay, questions so far sa ato ang mga microtubule inhibitor? Wala. So we have here epipodophylotoxins. This one is another group of anti-cancer drug. Epipodophylotoxins. That's the name hatas kayo. Ba't man kinsa mo nag-name ano sa ilagod? Again, epipodophylotoxins. So we have here the first drug under this group. We have the etoposide, which is semisynthetic derived from podophylotoxin, a toxin that is extracted from a plant called mayapple root. Scientific name is Podophyllum peltatum. Okay, again, the name of the drug is etoposide. Now, we also have teniposide. They have the same mechanism of action. Again, they have the same mechanism of action with that of the etoposide. Now, we have here the teniposide. Ang mechanism of action nila is inhibition of the topoisomerase 2. Remember when we discussed the DNA synthesis, di ba? Remember that DNA synthesis is, the DNA itself is a double helix. And before the synthesis happens, kailangan there will be uncoiling of this double helix. They have to be separated. Okay? So they will be separated by the helicase. Now, what's the problem with the separated strand? They have the tendency to recoil. So again, the problem, the separated strand has the tendency to recoil. So, magbalik sila sa as double-stranded. Now, to inhibit or to prevent the recoiling, that's the action now of the topoisomerase 2. So, kontrabida na si topoisomerase 2 sa pagbalik sa strand para they will be kept as separated or they will be kept separated from each other. Now, if we give the patient either etoposide or teniposide, these anti-cancer drugs will inhibit the topoisomerase 2. Now, if this one is inhibited, syempre the strands will recoil and that the synthesis will never happen. So, definitely, the etoposide and teniposide will inhibit the DNA synthesis. If there is no DNA synthesis, there will be no RNA and protein synthesis, and thus there is no life for the cancer cells. Ano lang ang inyong tandaan? The DNA sequence will be damaged. So, magkaka-problem tayo with the DNA synthesis. So, we only have 2 drugs under the epipodophylotoxins. Okay? And then we have the Kamtothicans, which are also derived naturally from the tree called Kamtotheca acuminata, which is originally found in China. So, class, the anti-cancer drugs are not really purely synthetic. All of them are not really made inside the laboratory. We even have antibiotics, right? But as we go on with our discussion dito sa dulo, dito natin makikita yung mga naturally derived anti-cancer drugs natin. So, we have here again the Kamtothicans from Kamtotheca acuminata. Just like our epipodophylotoxins, these drugs will also inhibit the topoisomerase 2, the enzyme which is responsible for the inhibition of the recoiling of the DNA strands. So kung inhibit natin si topoisomerase, again, magre-recoil yan, and there will be no DNA synthesis. Now, what are the examples of our Kamtothecans? We can easily identify them in their names, Topotecan and Irinotecan. So, they are used especially in the USA. Ito sila dalawa yung ginagamit talaga as anti-cancer. Now, Topotecan is used for advanced ovarian cancer but as second-line drug only following the platinum-based chemotherapy. So, ang pinaka-ginagamit talaga for breast cancer, ovarian cancer is the platinum later. Sa last na siyang platinum. Second line is the Topotecan. While Irinotecan is used as first-line therapy in combination with our anti-metabolite, the 5-FU, and the leucovorin. This is for the breast cancer. Okay? That's Topotecan and Irinotecan. Now, lastly, this one I think is the last group of anti-cancer drugs, the platinum analog. So we can easily identify them in their names. Kasi you can really see there the platin, Cisplatin, Carboplatin, and the Oxaliplatin. Mechanism of action of our platinum analogs, they are the same with the alkylating agents, meaning part of their structure will be incorporated to the DNA of the cancer cells, and thus killing the tumor. Because DNA synthesis will not happen, there will be inhibition of the different processes in the DNA synthesis, and that will also lead to the inhibition of the RNA and protein synthesis. So there will be no life for the cell. So cisplatin is called cis-diamine dichloroplatinum. So actually, ang structure niyan from the chemical name, we have here the platinum at the center. And since cis yan siya, remember the cis and trans in your organic chemistry. Pag cis, parehas na side. So cis-diamine, so meron tayong like dalawang amine dyan. So parehas na side, parehas silang nasa taas. And then dichloro. So we have another here sa baba, chloro. Parehas silang nasa baba. Okay? As long as parehas silang parehas silang the same side, we call that cis. But definitely, that's the structure of a cisplatin. This is the only anti-cancer drug that I know na very simple ang chemical structure. So this one is an inorganic metal complex. You have here the metal, the platinum, that was initially discovered through observation that neutral platinum complexes inhibited division and induced filamentous growth of the Escherichia coli. So the first or the history of the discovery of this drug started with the E. coli. They have observed that platinum can actually inhibit the division of the cells of the E. coli, and that later on it was used for clinical practice for cancer na. It's the cisplatin. So what condition ang ginagamitan ng cisplatin? We have non-small cell and small cell lung cancer, esophageal and gastric cancer, head and neck cancer, and genitourinary cancers like testicular, ovarian, and bladder cancer. And then we have here the Carboplatin, which is a second generation platinum analog. The difference between cisplatin and carboplatin is it has broader spectrum of action. So when it comes to the list of clinical application, the carboplatin has more indications or clinical applications than that of the cisplatin. But our problem with carboplatin is it can cause myelosuppression. When you say myelosuppression, it's the suppression of the bone marrow. So leading to the problems in the blood cell counts, either red blood cells or white blood cells. And lastly, we have the Oxaliplatin, which is naman now a third generation platinum analog, a diaminocyclohexane platinum analog. So originally, this one was used as second-line therapy in combination with 5-FU and leucovorin for metastatic colorectal cancer. So we have the so-called FOLFOX regimen. Bakit siya tinawag na FOLFOX? Kasi ano yan siya, abbreviation ng treatment protocol for colorectal cancer. Yan kasi yung ginagawa nila. Di ba sabi ko, pag cancer, most of the time, it's polypharmacy, combination of different anti-cancer drugs. Ang tawag dyan, protocol. And then most of the time, they abbreviate them based on the start of the names of the drugs. So just like the art shop last time na na-mention natin, ito naman the FOLFOX regimen. It is composed of the fluoropyrimidine 5-fluorouracil and the leucovorin plus the oxaliplatin. But again, dati second line, ngayon naging first line treatment na ito for metastatic colorectal cancer. Adverse effect, neurotoxicity. It involves peripheral sensory neuropathy like tingling sensation sa periphery sa kamay o sa tiil, murag na yung nagatusok-tusok. Muna siya ang side effect ni oxaliplatin. So that's all for our anti-cancer drugs. We have really finished everything. Do you have questions? So wala nang tayo 1 hour, naubos natin. Konti na lang kasi yon. Konti pa yun sa lagay na yun. Any question? Wala?